I spent my life working quietly, saving every penny so I wouldn't be a burden on anyone. At a family dinner, my daughter casually announced that her wedding required a $350,000 budget, and apparently I was the one paying. My husband laughed and said I worked for them. I finally spoke up and said no calmly, firmly. That's when his hand struck my face, twice. He didn't know the room was wired with a tiny camera, or that my legal team had been waiting for exactly this moment. That night changed everything, not just for him, but for everyone who thought my silence meant I was weak. My name is Beatrice Hammond, and I am 72 years old. I've worked since I was a teenager, double shifts, late nights, doing whatever it took to build a little safety for my old age. So when I cooked a quiet family dinner, I expected laughter, conversation, maybe gratitude. Instead, I felt like a guest at my own table. My husband sat at the head, as always, speaking about business as if I were a secretary rather than a wife. My daughter scrolled her phone between bites, barely making eye contact. I told myself to ignore the small slights, that families are imperfect. I didn't realize this evening would become the moment everything changed, the night they mistook my silence for permission one last time. Halfway through dinner, my daughter cleared her throat dramatically and announced that her dream wedding required a budget of $350,000. She didn't ask if it was possible. She didn't even pretend to soften the blow. She simply stated it as fact and then casually added that I would be paying. The room went still while she listed venues, couture dresses, imported flowers, and a honeymoon that sounded more like a global tour. I sat there quietly, spoon resting above my plate, stunned not by the number but by the entitlement. No one asked if I was comfortable. No one thanked me. They simply treated my lifetime of work as an open vault, theirs to spend before I was even gone. Before I could respond, my husband chuckled and told her not to worry, she works for us. He joked, waving toward me as if I were a household appliance. The words stung more than he realized. Years of comments like that had blurred into background noise, each one shaving away a piece of my dignity. But tonight they landed differently. Maybe it was age, maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was finally understanding that love without respect is just a cage with softer walls. I looked around the table and saw no partners, only people who believed I existed to serve them. That was the moment the quiet inside me began to harden into something stronger. I placed my napkin gently beside my plate and stood. My voice didn't shake. I didn't yell. I simply said, "That is never happening." You would have thought I'd flipped the table. Shock flashed across both their faces, not because the request was unreasonable, but because I had refused. My husband demanded to know what I meant. My daughter rolled her eyes like a child denied candy. I explained that my savings were for survival, not spectacle, and certainly not for people who treated me like an employee. For the first time in years, I spoke as an equal. And they hated it, the air thickened. My husband's expression shifted from surprise to anger, the kind that simmers before it burns. Before I could step back, his hand struck my cheek, once, then again. The room spun not from the blows, but from the realization that the line had finally been crossed. My daughter didn't reach for me. She didn't cry. She simply stared as if violence were just another negotiation tactic. I steadied myself on the table, feeling the sting bloom across my skin. In that moment, fear should have taken over. Instead, a strange calm washed through me, because I knew something they did not. They thought this dinner was about money. They didn't know it was about proof. For months I had been quietly preparing, consulting my legal team, gathering records, documenting the way control had crept into our home like mold. Tonight, a small camera sat tucked between the books on the shelf, blinking silently. Every word, every strike, every careless admission, all of it captured not for revenge but for protection. As they continued arguing, convinced I would eventually bend, I simply sat down and folded my hands. The truth was no longer trapped in my memory. It now lives on film. When the shouting faded, I didn't beg or negotiate. I excused myself from the table, walked calmly to the bedroom, and closed the door. In the mirror, the red marks on my face looked unreal, like they belonged to someone else. But the woman looking back at me wasn't weak anymore. She was done shrinking to keep the peace. I picked up my phone and sent one short message to my attorney. "It happened, you have the footage." Then I lay down, not in defeat, but in resolve. This wasn't the end of my life, it was the beginning of taking it back. The next morning, she met her legal team in a quiet conference room overlooking the city. They had been guiding her for months, gently helping her untangle the financial knots that had tightened around her life. When they saw the footage, no one spoke for a moment. It wasn't just assault, it was confirmation of years of control and financial manipulation. They assured her she wasn't powerless. There were options: restraining orders, financial protections, separation of assets. Hearing professionals speak clearly about rights she'd long forgotten, she had made something unlocked inside her. For the first time in decades, she wasn't reacting to life. She was shaping it. Together, they reviewed accounts she had once trusted others to manage. The numbers told a story: withdrawals, transfers, expenses that had nothing to do with her needs or well being. She'd been funding lifestyles, not a family. Seeing the truth laid out on paper hurt more than the slaps. Money, she realized, had been used as a leash disguised as security. But now the leash was slipping. Her lawyers spoke plainly about restoring control, freezing risky accounts, and protecting her retirement. Each step forward felt like reclaiming a lost language, one where she mattered, not just her bank balance. As she rode home, memories threaded together. The jokes about her being lucky to live there. The way purchases were questioned, yet large expenses were justified without her input. The subtle reminder that she should be grateful, that everything she had was because of him. Slowly, she recognized the pattern. Small compromises layered until she no longer recognized herself. Accepting peace had meant surrendering power. But now the truth was undeniable. Control isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers, "You owe us," until you forget you owe yourself anything at all. That illusion had shattered, and she wouldn't rebuild it. When news finally reached her daughter that legal action was underway, the response wasn't concern, it was outrage. Suddenly, the woman who had demanded a six-figure wedding spoke of family unity and keeping appearances. She minimized the violence, insisting it was a moment of stress. Hearing those words confirmed what she already knew: some people don't want healing, they just want silence. So she set a boundary, calmly, firmly. She explained that respect was no longer negotiable. If kindness wasn't present, access to her life would not be either. The conversation ended quickly, and for once she didn't cry afterward. Her legal team gathered everything: video clips, financial records, medical reports, and a timeline of behavior stretching further back than she wanted to admit. Each piece wasn't just proof, it was validation. She wasn't imagining the shift, she was too sensitive. She had endured more than most people ever should. Knowing the evidence was safe allowed her to finally rest. She placed the backup drive in a small, fireproof box, closed the lid, and exhaled. The truth no longer depended on memory. It was documented, protected, permanent. She began changing the rules of her life: separate accounts, independent passwords, personal mail redirected. She spoke less and meant more when she did. No more walking on eggshells. No more pretending that cruelty was love. When questioned, she stayed calm, repeating only one phrase: "This is what's best for me." Each boundary felt like a brick in a new foundation, not built from fear, but from self-respect. And though resistance met every change, she did not flinch. She had already lived through the worst moment. Everything now was recovered. Behind the scenes, plans took shape. Housing options were explored. Travel bags are quietly packed. Copies of documents stored safely with trusted people. She moved with patience, not panic, step by step toward a life where no one raised a hand or a voice to claim authority over her. She spoke little, observed much, and waited for the right moment. Strength didn't feel loud. It felt peaceful, like standing on solid ground after years of balancing on a cracking ledge. The woman they once thought powerless was preparing, and this time the ending would not surprise her. The day finally came when every signature was ready. Her lawyers filed the documents quietly, without drama or warnings. Protection orders, separation of finances, and formal complaints were all submitted with meticulous care. She didn't celebrate. She simply breathed, feeling as though a tight band around her chest had finally loosened. He received the news by courier, a thick envelope that replaced control with consequences. When the phone began to ring, she let it. There was nothing more to explain. Words had been twisted for years. Paper, on the other hand, spoke clearly and legally, and this time the law stood beside her. Within days, accounts were frozen, titles reviewed, and any vulnerable funds moved to protected status. She met calmly with financial advisors who treated her not as an accessory, but as the rightful owner of her future. Every revised document removed another chain she hadn't realized was wrapped around her life. He protested loudly, insisting everything was overreacting, but the system no longer bent to his voice. For the first time in decades, she knew that every dollar she had worked for was safe, not controlled, not monitored, not threatened. It was hers again, legally and undeniably. As investigators followed the paper trail, hidden truths emerged: loans she had never approved, purchases she had never seen, promises made in her name without her knowledge. Each revelation painted a clearer picture of just how long she had been treated as a resource rather than a partner. It hurt deeply, but pain mixed with relief. At least now there was proof. She no longer questioned her memory, or her judgment, or her worth. The lies weren't hers to carry anymore. They belonged to the man who had built them. News spreads quietly at first, then all at once. Friends, neighbors, and distant relatives began hearing fragments of the truth. Many had seen small signs over the years but dismissed them as marriage quirks. Now, with facts in front of them, sympathy replaced complacency. People who once overlooked her stepped forward gently, offering support without prying. He, meanwhile, found his audience shrinking. Respect cannot coexist with cruelty, and the community finally saw the difference. She kept her head high, refusing to gloat. Justice didn't need applause. Behind closed doors, the marriage that once looked solid began to crumble. He shifted from anger to charm to pleading, cycling through every tactic that had worked before. But something fundamental had changed. She was no longer listening through fear. She listened through clarity. Promises felt thin. Excuses echoed hollow. A partnership cannot survive when only one heart is honest. She didn't argue. She didn't accuse me. She simply stepped back emotionally, recognizing that love without safety is not love at all, it is captivity. Eventually, she sat across from her daughter and spoke plainly. No drama, no attacks, just the truth. She explained the manipulation, the violence, the financial abuse, and how entitlement had poisoned the home. Her daughter tried to dismiss it, then soften it, then blame stress, but none of it survived against the facts. The conversation ended with a quiet realization: respect is not optional. If it didn't exist, neither would access to her life or resources. It was the hardest boundary she had ever drawn and the most necessary. As the situation became public record, there was nothing left to hide. Friends stopped whispering. Lawyers spoke openly. Paperwork replaced rumors. The truth, once buried, now stood upright for everyone to see. And through it all, she carried herself with unwavering calm. She hadn't destroyed anything. She had simply refused to be destroyed. The woman they once underestimated now walked forward with the law on her side, her dignity intact, and a future that finally belonged to her. The courtroom didn't look dramatic, just rows of worn benches and a judge who had heard more heartbreak than most people could imagine. Yet the air felt heavy with truth. She sat quietly beside her legal team while recordings were played and documents submitted into evidence. Every dismissive comment, every financial contradiction, and finally, the violent moment recorded at the dinner table, all of it unfolded without shouting or spin. He avoided eye contact while the judge listened in solemn silence. For years, her pain had been minimized or mocked. Today, it was finally acknowledged under oath. And that recognition, simple, factual, public, felt like the first step toward genuine safety. As the case deepened, he tried to change his tone. Gone was the anger, in its place came strained apologies, declarations of love, and pleas to fix things privately. But apologies offered only after consequences arrive feel different. They are built from fear, not remorse. The court listened, but the evidence spoke louder. She didn't lash out. She simply confirmed the facts and let the process continue. Compassion doesn't require surrender, she reminded herself. You can wish someone healing while still choosing to protect your own life first. The day the judge granted long-term legal protection, the room seemed to exhale. Orders were issued. Boundaries were set in writing. Financial safeguards were locked into place so firmly that no one could quietly undo them again. She felt tears burn behind her eyes, not of sadness, but of relief. Safety, she realized, isn't just a feeling. It is a legal shield that allows you to sleep at night without wondering what tomorrow might take from you. She thanked the court softly, then walked outside into clear daylight that finally felt like it belonged to her. Even after the legal decisions, emotions lingered like echoes. There were days when memories tugged at her heart, trips they once took, laughter shared long ago, but those memories no longer controlled her. She had learned to separate history from reality. Kind moments do not erase cruelty. A house is not a home if fear lives inside it, so she created emotional space, not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect. Distance became her way of honoring the woman she had fought so hard to reclaim. Slowly, dignity returned not as pride, but as calm certainty. She spoke clearly now, walked with steadier steps, and no longer apologized for existing. People who once overlooked her began to see the quiet strength she carried. She didn't need to win arguments or prove anything. The truth, validated, documented, protected, had already done that. Her reflection in the mirror felt like an ally again, not a stranger who had learned to stay small. The house changed too. Rooms that once held tension now welcomed light through open curtains. She rearranged furniture, donated old things, and painted walls in warm colors that made the space feel like a soft embrace. This wasn't about erasing the past, it was about reclaiming her environment so it finally reflected peace instead of control. Every small change whispered the same message: you belong here safely, fully, freely. The final separation papers arrived without ceremony, just a signature line and a date. She signed them calmly, closing a chapter that had taken years from her, and yet returned something far more precious, herself. There was no dramatic farewell, no final argument, just a quiet acceptance that the life once shared had drifted too far from love to be repaired. She placed the signed documents in a folder, brewed a cup of tea, and sat by the window, not mourning what ended, but honoring what she had survived. Her fight for safety was finally over, but her new life was only beginning. Stay with me, and if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Independence didn't arrive like fireworks. It arrived quietly, in small decisions that finally belonged to her. She opened her own bank accounts, handled her bills, and spoke with professionals who treated her as the capable woman she had always been. Each step rebuilt confidence that control had slowly erased. She furnished a small office corner at home with folders, plants, and a sturdy desk, a space that felt entirely hers. For the first time in decades, no one hovered over her shoulder or questioned her choices. Independence wasn't about money. It was about ownership of her life, her time, and her peace of mind. Healing came in waves. Some days she woke feeling light, grateful to breathe freely again. Other days, old bruises, physical and emotional, pulsed like fading echoes. She let herself feel all of it without shame. Therapy sessions helped untangle years of subtle control and blame. Journaling became a nightly ritual, where she wrote honestly about fear, strength, and the woman she was becoming. Healing didn't erase the past, but it softened its grip. Slowly, the story stopped being about what was done to her and began to center on the choices she was making now. She decided that every relationship in her life from now on would be built on truth. No more walking on eggshells. No more shrinking herself to keep peace. Friends who valued her stayed. Those who preferred the old silent version drifted away, and she let them go without resentment. Conversations with her daughter remained complicated, sometimes distant, but she no longer begged for understanding. Respect had become her starting point, not her reward, and in that new honesty she discovered something surprising: the right people weren't threatened by her strength. They celebrated it. Her days soon settled into gentle rhythms. Morning tea by the window. A short walk through the park where birds gathered near the benches. Afternoons spent reading, painting, or volunteering at a local center where she met others rebuilding their lives. Evenings were quiet, soft music, warm lamps, and the soothing hum of a home finally free of tension. Peace wasn't a grand achievement. It was a collection of simple moments no one could take away. Each night, she locked the door knowing she was safe not because someone allowed it, but because she had chosen it. Support now came from people who showed up without obligations attached. Neighbors helped with groceries, friends called just to check in, and her legal team remained a reassuring presence whenever paperwork arrived. She joined a support group where women spoke openly about financial and emotional abuse. Listening to their stories reminded her she wasn't alone, and sharing her own gave others courage. Real support didn't try to control, fix, or silence her. It simply stood beside her while she continued to grow. Over time, she built a chosen family, a small circle of people bound not by blood but by kindness. Birthdays were simple gatherings filled with laughter instead of tension. Holidays no longer revolved around obligation. They centered on belonging. She realized that family isn't determined by titles like husband or in-law. Family is anyone who treats your heart as carefully as you treat theirs. And in that realization, the loneliness she once feared quietly faded away. One evening, she sat beneath a fading sunset and thought about the woman she used to be: quiet, accommodating, small. Then she thought about the woman she had become: steady, wise, unafraid to say no. Life hadn't gone the way she once imagined. In some ways, it had turned out stronger. She now lived on her own terms, with boundaries, self-respect, and a peace that no one could purchase or demand. Whatever years remained, she would fill them with truth, gentleness, and courage. And for the first time, that felt not just enough, it felt perfect.